On September 26, 2018, I took flight to my first microlight flight from Elstree Aerodrome to IWM Duxford. Having only flown commercial in the past and having now flown flight simulators for 11 years, I was finally given the opportunity to take flight in the real world. The flight was commanded by Ben Hilton, a friend of mine for a few years, and he too has a YouTube channel based on his flying, which is definitely worth checking out. In this video, I'll talk about the feeling of flying light aircraft and how different this really is to flying in a flight simulator. As soon as we took off, the first thing that really stood out was the feeling of flying. In a commercial aircraft, the cabin is designed to eliminate any feeling of the outside world at 30,000 feet, and for a flight simulator, this is just impossible to replicate the effects of turbulence and banking in the real world. As soon as we rotated and stabilised the aircraft, Ben pulled back on the stick, increasing our rate of climb as we reached our cruising altitude of 1500 to 1600 feet. While only light, the slight G effects that came over you as we climbed rather steeply, or the push to the left and right as you bank, it's not something that any flight simulator will ever be able to replicate with only camera adjustments taking their place. The next thing I noticed is actually how sensitive the flight stick really is. Yes, each aircraft is different and therefore will differ in control on a case-by-case basis, but in the CTSW, you only need to nudge the stick a centimetre or so to get the aircraft into a bank. You can also feel the airflow going around the wing. This causes a slight feedback onto the stick when gusts of wind push the flight surfaces. Most, if not all, flight simulator joysticks are very static with how they work, and use dead zones to stop any spiking that may occur with a faulty sensor. This is certainly not something that a real aircraft suffers from, and especially with light aircraft which use cable linkage directly attached to the control stick. The next big obvious difference is the scenery you get in both the real world and in flight simulators. While you can do everything in your power to make your P3D and X-Plane look as realistic as possible, nothing will ever beat the real thing. Looking down at the world, the cars on the road, the towns and cities grouped together, and the odd plume of smoke from farmers burning their old waste stock, it's just something you'll never see in a flight simulator. FSX especially gets the sense of scale wrong too. Flying at 2,000 feet in FSX just does not look anything like in real life. But don't get me wrong, there are some things that flight simulators do right when it comes to simulating real world flights. Thanks to blade element theory, it is possible to get a flight simulator's flight dynamics very similar to that as you'd expect to see in the real world. That means banking, wind and weight effects. It is possible to replicate this in simulators like X-Plane thanks to their method of imposing airflow around different parts of the aircraft and calculating the result of this, pushing it into your flights. Systems can also be really well done in flight simulation. In a smaller aircraft, it is possible to have each individual function work in a high quality model, and the same can also be said in a larger aircraft which has more buttons and switches. You look at aircraft like the PMDG 737 on FSX or the Flight Factor A320 on X-Plane. They are both aircraft with fully fledged systems that work exactly as you'd expect to find in the real world. Air traffic control is also easy to get done right, thanks to free communities like VATSIM, if they can get their voice codec right, IVAO and Pilot Edge. These communities have real people flying the traffic and controlling tower and airspaces, which as a result can get you some really good in-depth simming close to that of the real world. In all, I think it's fair to say that flight simulation, while it's not perfect, really isn't that bad at all. I mean, no simulator is perfect. Euro Truck Simulator doesn't feel like driving a truck, and Train Sim World does also have its issues, but at the end of the day, it's a hobby. We use these simulators to get the thrill of the real thing, when in cases it might not even be possible for us to do that in the real world. It took me 11 years of FS 2004, FSX and X-Plane 11 before I even stepped foot in a real plane, and while there were differences, there were a number of similarities too. For me however, I'll be an armchair pilot for a little bit longer before I start training towards a PPL, assuming Flight Simulator isn't totally dead for me, now that I have a thrill for the real thing.